this week, we get a report from SHOT Show. We find out why 2/3 of the team came home sick. And we think it's Dinger's fault. We talked about gender neutrality, sportsmen, sportswomen. Are we inclusive enough? Pick your pronoun. And finally, the dichotomous question, freeze or boil? It's up to you on Gravel.
Well, hello, America, and welcome to another episode of On Gravel. This is your trio of hosts. I'm Andrew McKean.
I'm Ryan Bronson.
And I'm Eric Dinger, polar vortexing.
You guys are not polar vortexing. It's 20 below here in the middle of the day where I'm at. I'm polar vortexing. You guys are posing.
Well, we're Nebraska polar vortexing.
So normally, being an eastern Montanan prairie dweller as I am, I can almost always win this fight. It's so cold that, but we're way above zero. We are not in the polar vortex, and I won't pick a fight I can't win. It's all yours, Bronson.
Thank you. You got to give Minnesota something. We have no Super Bowls. Haven't sniffed the World Series in I don't know how long. Never won a Stanley Cup. You got to give us something.
You can have the cold.
Thank you.
How about Manitoba?
Oh, I would kill to have Manitoba. Wouldn't that be awesome? I'd still want the Canadian duck limits up there. I'd want to be able to go and shoot 4 canvasbacks and not have to, abide by the Mississippi or Central Flyway limits of 1. But I'd take Manitoba in a second.
Would you still call it the Boundary Waters?
Well, yeah, you'd have to call it the Boundary Waters. I think that's Ontario on the other side there.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, see, geography. Yeah, I just clicked. I clicked and pointed with my fingers like I made guns. It doesn't work as well on a podcast. Sorry, guys.
Did you blow on your finger, too?
Afterwards.
Okay, yeah. Well, I don't know if, dear listener, you can hear that I am snowed in, if not meteorologically speaking, at least physiologically speaking. I got a head cold that will not quit. It's a chest cold that won't quit. I'm sick. I got Vegas crudted from the SHOT Show last week, and Bronson, I think you got a little bit too.
From your description of the symptoms, I think I have the exact same thing you do, and it's all Eric's fault.
Oh,
even the dog thinks so.
On cue. Thank you for that. Yeah.
That's a red dog barking, trying to defend her master's honor. The only person on this podcast that isn't sick. So what exactly were the two of you doing that got you both the same kind of sick?
Let me just say before I reveal what I was doing, Bronson, you know how annoying Dinger is when he's like chipper?
Yes.
He's doubly annoying when you're sick and he's not.
Mm-hmm. I generally experience it when I'm hungover and he's not. But yes, it's even worse when you've got sickness that you didn't, thrust upon yourself with bad decisions.
I really tried to just endure SHOT Show in my little temple of solitude. I had a room all to myself and really managed to just stay away from everybody. So I don't know how I got sick.
Yeah. That's exactly how Andrew McKean does SHOT Shows. Just hang out in his room. Never invited anything fun. Nobody really wants to hang out. Nobody ever squats in his room. Nobody ever throws parties unsolicited. Just solitude. SHOT Show solitude.
So this is my strategy. I refuse to blame Eric Dinger for getting me sick. I'm going to be stoic about the fact that he invited himself to my room and then had parties every night with people who wore gigantic gauze face masks and coughed in my face. I'm sure it's not their fault.
It's not my fault.
Are you talking about the Ducks Unlimited guys?
Yeah. Yeah, so I wasn't going to blame Eric for this at all, but since he brought it up, I'm pretty sure it's all his fault.
Not my fault. I'm popular and people want to hang out with me.
Well, not many people did want to hang out with you because, we'd get these notices, hey, stop by room blankety blank because we're throwing a party. We got all this booze. and there'd be like 4 dudes, and that was it.
So the first night, I actually took off all my clothes and got in bed while the party was still going on. I said, "Don't take it personally. I'm not kicking anybody out, but I'm going to go to bed," and I did.
I immediately left.
It was also it was 3:15 in the morning.
This is a problem I have in life in general. Is I have good intentions and I try to do things that are nice for others, but I don't necessarily time them as well as I should. And so my friends, my closest friends, call that a dinger party, where like today I might invite people to a Super Bowl party at my house after everybody has Super Bowl plans, and so then it's like me and 2 other people, and each of us can share like 3 bottles of booze that I bought for the party, with all the intentions to have a good time. But that, dear listener, as if you didn't already know, those of you who are my closest friends, is called a dinger party in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's not one of my best characters.
Before we rip on Eric too much, I think I need to relay one quick story where Eric did the opposite, where instead of inviting himself to someone else's hotel room, he invited me to stay with him. We had never met before. We were in Augusta, Georgia for a National Wild Turkey Federation meeting, and the hotel where I had made a reservation had overbooked, and they said I couldn't stay there. So I went next door to the hotel, and this tricked out Ford F-150 comes pulling up in the parking lot behind me, and I walk in, and I'm talking to the person at the front desk to see if I can get a room. And the person driving the tricked out Ford F-150 was none other than Eric Dinger. And we had never met before. We talked on the phone maybe once or twice, and he figured out who I was because I was talking to the hotel person, and when they said they didn't have any rooms and I was going to have to go to the other hotel, Eric promptly invited me to stay in his room, even though we had never met before. So it's the fact that he would invite himself to stay with you, Andrew, uninvited, just insert himself, reflects the magnanimity of his personality, where it just would never occur to him that you wouldn't want him to stay in your room with you, because he's just, that's how his mind works. He's just a giver, and he thinks the whole world should.
Well, I mean, to his credit, I actually was thinking about extending the invitation to him to share the room. The fact that he beat me to it is not a deal breaker at all.
Fake news.
The fact that he then said, "Hey, we're going to have a party in our room," was only a slight eyebrow raiser. The fact that we had a party every night while I was trying to, get rid of the hepatitis in my kidneys, that's where I actually, in all seriousness, that wasn't even a bad thing. The only time I think I might have gotten slightly cranky with Eric was, I think it was about 3:30. We had just kicked the last person out of our room, and I'm tired. I've got a breakfast meeting at 7, and the lights are out. I'm finally snuggled into my pillow. I think I'm going to drop off. And Dinger says, "If you were going to write a book, what would it be about?" and I think I indulged the conversation for just a couple of minutes, and then finally, my little inner voice said, "Why are you doing this, McKean?" And I said, "Eric, shut the hell up. I'm going to sleep." And I think he whimpered just a little bit like a puppy.
I am not going to defend myself. Some of that was true. All of it was generally in line with the truth. Oh, I think I actually asked you if you were going to be the editor-in-chief of a non-endemic magazine, like something other than.
Oh yeah,
that's what it was.
Yeah, okay.
Which the world wants to know, like, what's Andrew McKean into outside of hunting? Like, what? Like,
it was, and
but you're right. It doesn't make great pillow talk in Vegas at 3:45 a.m.
No, the words non-endemic at 3:45 really don't belong.
No,
No.
I agree.
So I guarantee that there are former college roommates of Eric's that have got stories that could top this, and I would encourage them to get onto the On Gravel Facebook page and please share those stories because we'd like to hear them.
So that was shot. Anything our listeners should know about shot that they don't already?
Well, I think it's important that people know that it is 4 days of extreme work. It's a sprint for 4 days, and fully 2/3 of the shooting industry and media and everything related comes home sick from it. And so I think February tends to be a pretty non-productive month for a lot of us on the heels of it. But our whole world builds up to those 4 days, and then those 4 days happen, and now we got to go out and do business.
From the media standpoint, it's New Year's Day. I mean, it really is where the year begins. It's interesting. It used to be, I think, more important in terms of demarcation for new product introductions. Now I think the NRA show has taken a little bit of that oxygen, but it's still a place that new products get unveiled, where there's an awful lot of vending. Vending is done in terms of writing sales orders. And from a media perspective, it's where we really kind of get a good idea of what the trends are going to be in terms of new gear. And in some ways, also I would say hunting styles. We saw the tactical world really make a lot of inroads into the hunting world at SHOT 4 or 5 years ago. That's a trend that has kind of flattened a little bit, but I would say the tactical, military, law enforcement side of SHOT is still a huge part of the show.
Do you think it's flat? Do you think it's growing slightly still, or do you think it's retracted a little bit?
The tactical side of it,
Yeah, the tactical side.
I think it's flat, but I think it's flat at a very dominant level. Certainly if you compare kind of the traditional hunting side of the business with the tactical side, which I would include to be law enforcement, military, as well as the crossover in terms of long range precision shooting and sniping and that business. Boy, I think it's still the dominant part of the show. You don't see very many, let's say, new game calls or new camouflage patterns. Really, so much of the innovation is on the synthetic gear side in terms of what carbon fiber can be transformed into next, or Kevlar, or kind of that side of things. When I was mentioning that technological, or the intrusion of technology into an awful lot of what we do, has really been led by the military and the law enforcement side as well.
Yeah, but don't you think that's been a tradition in the firearms industry since forever? The bolt action rifle was a military application before it became a sporting one. And the semi-auto, was a military application before it became a sporting one. And hell, probably the pump action shotgun was probably a military application before it became a sporting one. I think there's a long tradition there. The AR-15 and the whole modern sporting rifle movement, I think, is just the latest iteration that the industry has gone through for 100 years or more.
I totally agree. I think it's all of the accessories that go along with it that really have broadened that whole footprint.
They're going to they're going to 3 hotels over the next 3 years or something, I think I read, right? They're going to spread further into the area, and they're adding Caesars next year because they've run out of show space.
Yeah, it's a big
I
deal.
haven't tracked that closely. That's just tactical stuff that's going to be over there, right? It's not, it's smaller, newer vendors.
Well, no, it's well, the one I read about specifically was they're going to build an OEM village at Caesars, where if you're a tactical company and you're buying steel, or somebody's bending and breaking your uppers or something like that, the people that are supplying what we consider manufacturers, what I would call OEMs from back in my manufacturing days, there's a whole separate sort of sub show that's happening there, and will be, I think, at Caesars starting next year. But they're like some of the crazy stats about this. There's 80,000 people that go to SHOT, 2,700 booths this year, which I thought was cool. I saw somebody wrote that if you spent every minute of the show walking the floor, you could spend 29 seconds at each booth and see the whole show. That's incredible, right? So now that it's going to grow more and go to separate hotels, I can't imagine how, McKean, your feet are going to really hurt covering that whole damn thing next year.
Yes, they will.
I do just the opposite. I just sit in my booth the whole time and never get to see anything else. So people ask me, hey, what's hot at SHOT Show? I can't talk about anything other than the new shorty shot shell from Federal Ammunition.
What is that?
Google it. You'll see a video that McKean did that went completely viral. So my social media consultant did all the work on that.
Yes, she did.
That's right. Yeah, explain that. How can so I did just before that a video of Swarovski's new range-finding rifle scope, which is actually a pretty nifty piece of technology. It's a laser rangefinder inside a rifle scope. Looks like a rifle scope. Ranges out to 1,200 yards. Shows you your bullet energy at that range. Now, optics are kind of inscrutable in terms of, it's hard to get all of their attributes through a description, being visual people that we are. But then we turned around and we did the video on the Federal Shorty shell. I think the Swarovski video has gotten something like 40,000 views, and the Federal Shorty shell has gotten 625,000 views, something like that. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows why?
And it's not like we invented the shorty shotgun shell. I mean, they existed before. We just apparently have perfected them.
Apparently.
Andrew, what did you see that was new and cool at SHOT? Anything worth talking about?
I really go there with my optics hat on, because one of the things I'm doing is soliciting submissions for the Outdoor Life optics test. So from an optics standpoint, there is an awful lot of range-finding binoculars. Leupold's got one. Vortex has got a new one. Athlon has got a new one. I think Pulsar has got a new one. So, they've been around for a long time, but I feel like that's brands are just filling out their catalogs with them. Interestingly, few of them are made by the brands that are selling them. So they're OEMing them. And a couple of them look like they're coming from the same factory floor, the same production line. So it'll be kind of interesting to see once we get them head to head. I mentioned a little bit the extension of the trend of seeing electronics in optics. So, last year we had that Revic rangefinder, or a Revic rifle scope that's got a very, very interesting elevation turret. You turn it, and inside the heads-up display, you see the yardage displayed as you turn the elevation turret. So that's kind of interesting. SIG has got its it's called the BDX. It's a rangefinder that's tethered to a rifle scope. So when you range a distance, the holdover dot shows up on the elevation stadia in the rifle scope. So we're seeing more and more and more of that, which I think is interesting. It seems like we're in the golden age of revolvers and pistols. I mean, there are a lot of new handguns out there. Certainly existing platforms, 1911s, and there's just all kinds. But Mossberg's got a new handgun for the first time in 80 years or something like that. It was just interesting. There's a lot out there. I'm not a big handgun guy, so I can't really describe all the nuances and kind of the derivations of them, but definitely a lot of hand candy.
I think we're in a time now where the industry is, dealing with a flattening demand, or, we certainly have gone down from our peak a few years ago. Now's the time that you innovate or you die. So the innovations that you're seeing now this is when the cool, interesting stuff comes out. 6 years ago, what you had to do is be able to build enough ammunition or build enough rifles to meet the demand. And now that the market has shifted, you have to make it cooler and better and new to try to uh, convince the consumer that he needs a new firearm. So I think now is the kinds of times in the cycle that we go through that you're going to see innovation. So that can be fun. It's for a lot, for a lot of gun and ammo companies, it's scary time because it's a tough market and it's dog eat dog out there. But for the consumer, now's the time you're going to see some new cool stuff come out, which is good.
Yeah. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and have, sometimes we have these discussions and kind of abstract questions that we kind of already know the answer to, but I'm going to ask one that I genuinely don't know the answer to, and I have some feelings about it, but I'm going to set it up this way. We had a powder hook user email us to say they had discovered powder hook, they had downloaded the app, they were excited to be involved, but when they were building their profile, they complained that that this is a woman who was doing this, that there were no gender neutral terms in the profile menu. She had run up against the term sportsman, and she said, "Well, I'm not a man. I really don't know how to answer that." So we had a little internal discussion amongst the powder hook crew about, do we change some of those menu choices to be inclusive? Do we not? It's interesting to me as an editor because it's one of the things that's always been, I guess, an imperative is to make sure that we use words that have clarity, that mean something. And one of my complaints with gender inclusiveness is sometimes we make words mushy to make them inclusive. But sportsman is one that I've actually always struggled with personally. It does indicate gender. I don't know that my daughter is a sportsman. What do you guys think? Is sportsman inclusive enough?
When I used to be in politics, one of the things that I would do with my candidates is prep them for how to talk to rooms full of hunters and anglers and folks. And one of the things that you coach them on is how to use language that isn't going to be stumbly, that's not going to cause problems, and also isn't going to offend anyone. And so the term that I always coached when talking to sportsmen and sportswomen was to just refer to everyone as hunters and anglers. Hunters and anglers. And so it was a little bit exclusive. If you're a bow fisherman or a spear fisherman, you weren't included in there. If you're a trapper, you weren't included in there. But the reason that I always suggested that, because they were gender neutral, they were inclusive, it captured the audience you were looking for. I just always found sportsmen and sportswoman to be, it's not lyrical. It's crunchy and clunky and it's just bad verbiage. And I resist to some extent this kind of politically correct having to declare what your pronouns are before you meet anybody new, because no one knows. People are getting way too wound up about pronouns these days. But I understand if you're a woman and you think sportsman excludes you, that's a problem. Traditionally, I've always thought of, the classical Latin languages. The you had masculine verbs and feminine verbs and masculine nouns and feminine nouns, and then you had the default was usually masculine. It's I guess I never thought of that as some deep dark exclusive thing. I just thought of it as you have to have a norm, and that was the language norm. Now, I guess I'm open to hearing the discussion if it really is a problem to call people sportsmen, but doing away with thousands of years of the English language because we're trying to not offend somebody is, well, it's a problem. I imagine it's a real problem for an editor of a major publication, but those are my 2 cents.
There?
A while back I wrote something where I made a argument that sportsman could be inclusive of man or woman, I think it fell flat because I think that's obviously a man's point of view. The term sportsman to me says exactly what I want it to say, and in my head, I don't think of the gender. I think of the values and the behaviors of a person that I would call a sportsman. But it's interesting when somebody who sees the world differently than I do brings it to my attention and says, that word isn't a word that feels welcoming to me. And so much of what our brand and what we try to do and what all of the R3 movement tries to do is just we try to show people that they are welcome and that they can see themselves doing this. So we use pictures of non-traditional hunters a lot, and we really seek out. I feel we try to find stories and examples of and celebrate things that aren't your typical Midwestern white male demographic, because as we all know, the Midwestern white male demo is going to be a minority in this country, and in hunting it's something like, I don't remember, 91% white and 79% male. Even with the growth in female participation, it's still very male driven. And so I hear loud and clear what Bronson's saying, where it's like, geez, do we have to pander to every wish? Do we need a slide bar on our app asks for gender? Do we need a slider bar there instead of a 2-button answer, you're male or female, or do we need to have the ability to allow somebody to identify somewhere in between? And I guess where I net out on it is whether socially I believe one thing or another. I think when it comes to an environment like Powder Hook, our job is to lead the inclusiveness conversation. And in the case where this user pointed out some things that we could do differently, I think we've probably failed her in that she came with the intention to be a mentor. She is a hunter, and yet she didn't see herself in what we were doing. And so I think for the sake of appealing to different people, for the sake of leading sort of from the front of what it means to be inclusive and what it means to invite people in different ways of thinking into this conversation, I think we do as a brand need to really be conscious of the words we use and the options that are available. And so I tend to agree with her that we could choose different words. My challenge is I don't know the eloquent single term to describe a man or woman who shares the values and behaviors of a sportsman. And that's what I'm hoping you have in the back of your mind, Andrew, is what's this? Because what Bronson said is exactly right. Saying sportsmen and women is just, it's ineloquent. It's just, it just doesn't flow very nicely. And to say hunters and anglers maybe, puts out the bow fishermen or whatever. And so I am just like and this reminds me a lot of the term mentor. Like, people become digital mentors on Powder Hook. Well, to call what you do on Powder Hook the same thing as what an actual mentor does shortchanges by a long ways what an actual mentor does. Somebody who commits longitudinally to help somebody change their life through consistently being involved in their life, that's a mentor. And what we do is digital mentoring, but it's more like local help desk or local guide or friend for a minute than it is mentoring. But we struggle to find the right word to use. And I do think it's worth the discussion to figure out what word could we use, and then maybe can we use the platforms that you, Andrew, are a part of, and Ryan, you're a part of, and I'm a part of, to proselytize a new term that we all agree is more inclusive and is a better representation of what we mean when we say sportsman. So I'm a yes on I want to be more inclusive. I'm a yes that I think we can do better. I just don't know if I know exactly the right term to use. What do you think, Andrew?
Well, a couple things before I get to that. As clunky as sportsmen and sportswomen are to be entirely inclusive, sportsperson is even worse. That takes all of the lyric elements out of it, to use Bronson's term. I don't have a great alternative, but I would go back to kind of the derivation of the term. And part of this comes from a really interesting slideshow I put together last June for the Jack O'Connor Center. I was the keynote speaker there out in Lewiston, Idaho, and I thought everybody in that room is going to know more about Jack O'Connor than I do. Jack O'Connor, for you, dear listener, was the longtime shooting editor at Outdoor Life and really kind of invented the category of outdoor writer in a lot of ways. He's got a museum and a kind of memorial body out there in Lewiston where he ended the last days of his life. Anyway, the presentation I put together was tracing the evolution of the American sportsman through the covers of Outdoor Life from 1898 all the way through the last century. Fascinating. We'll have to show it I'll show it to you guys someday. But basically starting really with the kind of the age of scarcity and bringing back wildlife, and then having a superstructure of state game agencies and kind of the Great Restoration age, and then the emergence of, this is where I'm going to bring up this term, the uniquely American fixture, this personality called the sport. And this was the first person who recreationally hunted, probably in the history of the world. We think about the social value of wildlife. In the 50s, starting in the late 40s after World War II, we really had abundant wildlife, and we had game agencies that were firing all cylinders. We had surplus World War II gear, and we had people with disposable time and income to devote to their hobby. And so the American sport really became something. It was kind of a dandy. A lot of those covers showed, kind of like the local insurance agent out for a day with his buddies, pheasant hunting. They all had pipes and jaunty little hats and kind of a twinkle in their eye. That was the American sport. That's where we're getting the term sportsmen and sportswomen. And I think it cheapens what we've become as stewards of American wildlife to call ourselves sports. It just seems very thin and cheap. But I guess I would throw that out as to kind of strip away the gender attachment to it. Maybe we're sports. Does that imply too much of a frivolity and trophy hunting, or does it get at kind of the origin of the term and what we are?
I think it can be misconstrued to have frivolity, but for me, the sportsman creed and dogma, that was a advertising centerpiece of Federal Ammunition's advertising in the 30s and 40s, was this set of principles that, what made a sportsman different than a slob hunter or a game hog. And it was that there was a set of rules, sometimes written, sometimes not, that separated sport hunters from traditional meat hunters that were, they were hunting exclusively only to put food on the table or to sell it commercially in the commercial markets. That they created a set of rules that governed how they did it. Part of it was fair chase and things like that. It's like other athletics, other sports, that there's more effective ways probably to hit a golf ball, but we make rules on what the equipment limits are going to be. Now I'm talking way outside of my knowledge base. I don't know anything about golf, but we make rules that limit us and restrict us, and I think that's actually an opportunity to elevate the pursuit above just its basis levels. Not that hunting for meat is a bad thing; it's a really good thing. But hunting for meat and also doing it in a way that has some nobleness to it, has a set of rules that govern us. Those are positive things. So that's my perspective on the whole history of the sportsman. For me, it goes back to 10th grade when I was in a composition class, and I always stumbled over the singular non-gender specific pronoun. And I always would say they. And my teacher said, no, it's his or her, because there is no gender neutral singular pronoun. And that always annoyed me. So I always used they. I apparently was ahead of my time because I was coming up with a gender neutral pronoun way back when. but it got beat into my head that that's the wrong way to write, that that's not how the English language works, and stop it. So I guess I kind of adopted it over the years that, you know, it's okay to be to use a pronoun that doesn't exactly describe you, knowing that it isn't intended to be exclusive. It can be inclusive.
So if I understand what you're saying, you agree with the term sport, but maybe change it. So are you saying that we're now spurts?
Yes, we're spurts. I actually voted for sportsman before I voted against it.
I mean, I think sportsman is the right term. It's just it's only right because it's right in my head, right? My lens says that term means what I want it to mean, and I think that the woman that wrote us sees it differently, and I want for her to like this sounds goofy, guys, but like if if we're going to sell more hunting licenses, people like that need to know that they are welcome and need to see themselves in the words we use. And so I do think it's a really important conversation. And of course, we're going to go back to her and engage with her, and maybe she's got an idea. But this is harder than I think most people give it credit. Is words matter, and in a day and age when her email can be construed as, oh, she's just a snowflake, offended, whatever. I think we shortchange the differences in the way people think and talk in this industry a lot, in that it's really, really homogenous, and we aren't really
but
aware
it's not
of.
just our industry; it's the English language.
No, but I think Eric's onto something. I think our industry is a holdout in terms of resisting a real examination of this.
Well, I'm the default conservative on the group, so I'm usually the holdout. But I'm open to the discussion. So
But I think this
actually I've been enjoying this.
I think this is a conservative idea, right? Like to include others in something that is wholesome and matters requires maybe a change in the words we use, but we're not trying to change the thing. We're not trying to change what's on the other end of the word. We just want to know. I'll give you a crazy example that this is one of the best examples I've ever heard in this industry. So Hispanic men and women in this country do not, in general, buy hunting and fishing licenses. I have always wondered why, if this country is 17% Hispanic, why is 1.5 or 2.5% of the license buyers in this country Hispanic? Had absolutely no idea why, but I assumed it was something that fish and game websites weren't available in Spanish, or culturally there was a difference. But it hit me like a cold splash of water when I found out from a Hispanic woman why Hispanic families don't buy hunting licenses. And it's because they, A, don't trust the government at all, and B, avoid at all costs culturally anything that has to do with registering anybody in their family with the government. And they view Fish and Wildlife agencies as government. And so culturally, there is a desire to hunt and fish. But if we're going to get that audience of people excited about doing it the way we do it, we've got to figure out, maybe we need to issue a different kind of license, or why do we need to ask for a social security number when we get a hunting license? I mean, can we just get a cell phone number instead, or something like that? And all of
no, and I can answer the social security question if you want.
Well, all of those things are, I think, really conservative ideas, because we're trying to keep this thing that matters to us relevant and important and part of Americana. And what that means is we have to evolve in the words we use and in the offerings of our industry. And I think that's a really important conversation for us to have. I just wish I had more clear answers on, the specific question at hand. So what were you going to say about Social Security numbers?
So the whole reason that every state requires collecting Social Security numbers is because of a federal law that was passed back in the 90s that required states to collect that data so that they could track down deadbeat dads. And Minnesota was one of the last states to comply with that federal law, and it was at the risk of losing federal funding which often happens when big federal government gets in and starts imposing its will on the states, despite what the 10th Amendment says. Anyway, I was working at the legislature at the time. We resisted it as long as we possibly could. But the reason never was about, enforcing immigration status or anything else. It's a federal law to track down deadbeat dads and deadbeat moms. I guess I'm being gender specific, but it was an old federal law, and that's the whole reason that it's required. But when it comes to, I certainly understand skepticism and distrust of the government. But hunting and fishing are a privilege for citizens and legal occupants, in the United States. So if it's simply to avoid immigration enforcement concerns, I don't know that we can solve that in the hunting and fishing world. That's a bigger issue than we can deal with. But I also tend to not believe that the entire Hispanic population in the United States is fleeing enforcement of immigration status.
Oh, absolutely not.
I mean, the vast majority of Hispanics in America are here legally and rightfully. And so I don't understand completely that issue and concern.
Sure. Her point was much less about immigration, legal versus not, and more about a general distrust of governmental entities in the Hispanic culture. And I'm puppeting what she's saying. I guess I'm not editorializing. I had never heard it phrased in that way, that like I'll say it as close to exactly how she said it as possible. She said, you are never going to sell a hunting license to a Hispanic family if you have to ask for a social security number. That's what she said. And she said, because those families are programmed to distrust government and any request for information that reflects the ability to track them or their family.
Well, that describes me and my family as well.
Yeah. So I don't know that we found the word. Andrew, do we have a word? I mean, it's a vexing problem.
So I'm going to propose this. I don't know if it's quite right, but it kind of takes. I don't like to borrow from the French at all, unless it's Parmesan cheese but I guess that's Italian. But what about chaser?
Is that what the French call?
Oh,
we're chasers.
Right.
Yeah, chasseurs. I'll butcher it.
CHASSEUR. Yeah, that's the French word for hunter.
And that's not a bad way to look at it. That we're pursuers, and the thing that's kind of poetic about it is, we each may be pursuing something different, and it's not always an animate object. So I guess I would throw that out, at least as a starting point. I think it's aspirational. It's certainly gender neutral, and it kind of gets, I think, at why we do what we do.
How do you say it?
And it lets me use the word cartouche, which is the French word for cartridge.
How do you say chasseur?
Oui.
Did I say it right?
I think that's close.
That's close.
Well, I think this is a great use for the comments section. I'd love to hear what our listener thinks. What should we call a hunter and angler and trapper and bow fisherman and spear fisherman or woman, if we were to include all of them, both men and women, in the same term?
Well, where could someone have a discussion and comment on this?
They could certainly do that on Powderhook, or they could certainly do that on our On Gravel Facebook page, which is brand new. Facebook.com/ongravel.
Brand new.
Somehow, though there are millions and millions of Facebook pages, Facebook.com/ongravel was available, and that is us. So check us out. Give us a follow. Or whatever it's called, a like.
So before I go and cough up my other lung, I want to leave with a dichotomous question that seems seasonally appropriate. This was one that came up at dinner table the other night. I can't remember which of my boys it was, but asked the family how they would like to die. And that got our attention. And then he embroidered it. He said, here's the thing. You are in a room, and your captors will raise or lower the temperature 1 degree every day until you expire. What do you want? Do you want it to get hotter, or do you want it to get colder? Bronson?
On behalf of the rest of my people, my tribe from the bold north, we want to die of cold. Take it down a degree at a time. Eventually, you become hypothermic. You become tired. You close your eyes, and you just drift off. Whereas if I sweat my ass, that is miserable. So anything over 75 degrees is too much. Too much. Dinger?
Oh, I'm going to have to say I want the fastest route to passing out. And so I think I'm going to get dehydrated quicker than I'm going to freeze. And I'm going to pass out from dehydration within a matter of a few days. And so turn that heat up. I moved south from Minnesota for a reason. You guys are crazy. 30 below this morning in the town that I went to high school in. You kidding me? I'm going to turn up the heat.
Andrew?
I am a true blue northerner. I want to become comfortably numb, go into a swooning sleep, and never wake up. Interestingly, my kids shared my viewpoint, except for my tropical flower of a spouse said she would prefer to go out in a hot flash.
A woman wanting hot flashes is a rare woman indeed.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. Till next week, won't you keep it on gravel?